I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to Bigfoot, America's Creek Devil. Tom, would you like to make an announcement and introduce our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a gentleman that I found online. He has an outdoor channel that is dedicated towards, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the best way to describe it is wilderness camping, wilderness survival. I hope I get this correct, but I believe that you used to be a U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Park Service ranger. So, yell and scream if I got that wrong. And
National Park Service, Tom.
National Park Service. See, I'm good. I'm always good at getting something wrong. Okay. And the name of the channel, and we're going to put a link to his channel in the description here, but it's called, if you want to look at it or Google it, it's just Angry Owl Outdoors, YouTube. And I don't know why, where that name came from, so we're going to ask him that. That said, we're going to go ahead and proceed. But real quick, just if you like the show, you guys know what to do. Let us know. Click the like and subscribe. It feeds that hungry algorithm from YouTube and Google. And if you want to support us a little bit further, you can do so. We have a link in the YouTube description, which is patreon.com/creekdevil. Or you can just go to patreon.com/creekdevil and just follow your nose, and you can decide how much if you want to support us. It really helps us to help you guys. Some people do it for as little as $1 a month, and those folks are greatly appreciated. So with that said, I'm going to hand the mic over to Will, and we're going to kick this off and get started.
Okay, I was just going to mention real quick before we get rolling, to check out our website, creekdevil.com. You can also take a look at mine, williamjevning.com. But on the Creek Devil website, you'll see the press kit for our first film that's coming out very soon on Amazon Prime. So if you want to take a look at that, it's interesting, and it should be available shortly. We're still waiting to hear on exactly when its release date is. So, Tom, you want to kick this off?
Yeah, absolutely. So the YouTube channel is one that I kind of stumbled onto a few months ago, and I just saw this guy out there camping alone in the wilderness, in the snow. And as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you didn't even have a tent. You just, I don't know if you got under a root ball or something and built a fire, and you had that little solar lantern. So I thought this is really cool. The name of the channel, again, is Angry Owl Outdoors, all one word. Can I start by asking, where did that name come from? It's kind of intriguing.
So while I was searching around for names, I mean, you're trying to think of something that kind of identifies a little bit of character of yourself and kind of what you want to promote with the channel. It kind of stemmed from my time as working as a ranger. I used to give ranger talks to youth and adults, and one of my favorite talks was to go over owls and just kind of all that they can do, everything that goes into them, from biology to habits to just kind of their unique traits. And just every time I see an owl, they kind of look almost grumpy, and they're just, to me, they're fascinating creatures. And I thought, it just seems like that's an angry owl over there. And I remember seeing I'm a heavy coffee drinker, and I remember seeing a mug once that I think it said something like a grumpy owl, before having his coffee, and kind of showed this pouting owl. And it kind of stuck with me. And I thought, well, I'm outdoors and I see owls all the time and hear them when I'm out alone, and kind of that eerie hoot that they have depending on the species and kind of location. So it just kind of stuck. And my wife said, yeah, that's good. So that's where it came from.
Well, I have to agree 100%. And we've talked about the owls on this show considerably. And I just love the haunting sound of an owl. We have a creek in our backyard, and across the creek there's a cottonwoods probably 90 foot tall, but every fall and winter we get a pair of great horned owls that go in there, and literally when they hoot, you can hear it with all the windows closed and stuff. You can still hear those hoots, and I just love that sound. So I want to talk a little bit about your background in the wilderness, and how did you get into doing this outdoor stuff? I mean, this is really right there on the cusp of doing wilderness survival and bushcraft and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, just growing up in Idaho, just the outdoors are your backyard. And I was, early to late 80s, 90s as a younger kid. It was get out of the house and go play. And part of that was just making forts. I just had a fascination with making forts and the trees and the mountains. And my wife still gives me a hard time because I can go out and just stare at a tree and point out something with it. And we'll go for a walk and somewhere else, and I'll say, "Hey, look at that tree. Look at this, marker on it." And she says, "Well, that's the same as the other tree." But just the outdoors has just always fascinated me. Just all the uniqueness of creation that's out there. And as a child, I would just I was always outdoors, whether it was around here in Idaho or on trips. I would spend a lot of summers in Nevada and kind of do the same thing, see if I could build a fort or build some kind of survival. It was just kind of during the movies of that time in the late 80s, you had all these kind of survival commando type characters, and I would try to emulate that. And then as I got older and just kind of graduated from going out and building forts to just camping and hunting and being out hiking. And it was really about the time of kind of Les Stroud with Survivor Man. Once he started hitting mainstream, I got really into that. And I just soaked up all the knowledge that he had, and read his books, watched just about every episode. And I thought, this is a good thing to learn. And it was fun. I was already outdoors, so I just started practicing. And then once I got into my career, being a park ranger, like I mentioned, a part of it was with National Park Service, and then part of it was with state parks. I did a lot of rescue calls, search and rescue, medical, and during those times you would see predicaments that people would get themselves into because of lack of skills, lack of planning, and it just kind of seeded it in me that this is a knowledge that everybody should have. This is something that's fun to practice. You can go out at any skill level. You can know absolutely nothing and just, even go car camping or go in your backyard and start to learn these skills of just how to make a fire, how to build a basic shelter. And you never know when those are going to come into play. I mean, we look at around us in the world, just weather incidents, or people get trapped in their cars, or they just go off the road and start hiking, and they're done. They don't have any knowledge. No one knows where they're at. So all those things kind of accumulated. And I was already heading out a couple times a year to do what I called misery trips. And a lot of that was usually I'd try to find the coldest day in the winter and go out and just test myself. And I did it within reason and had safety parameters, and people knew where I was. And that's currently how I still operate. But I wanted to push things to the boundary of exhausting myself and also seeing what problems develop, what happens when you're exhausted, when your muscles are cramping, when you smash your hand with an axe, all the things which have happened, and how do you carry on, and just kind of that how do you have that discipline, and how do you have that mindset to carry on? And in the jobs that I've had, mindset is everything, and just that psychological impact that if you pre-plan things and work through them, it can make you successful on the latter end. And all that kind of led up to starting the channel. Somebody said, why don't you film this? And I knew nothing about filming. Like I mentioned to you, Tom, I just got a smartphone in this last December and realized how easy it is to film. And so I started the channel up mid-February. I've been rolling about 8 months now, and had a pretty good response. And I just try to present what I think is helpful, what is enjoyable, and I try to show the reality of it. I show myself dripping sweat and irritated or failing with a shelter and getting up at 4 a.m. and packing out because I'm tired of sand clots dropping on my face. And but that's what I want to show, is that anybody can do it. It's a learning learning venture. So that's kind of the long and short of the history of got me to where I am currently.
I had to chuckle a little bit because it sounded like my first year in the Army.
That makes sense.
Well, I notice a lot of your gear looks like it's military surplus, and I was very tuned into that. Especially, you have a rain cover for your backpack. Obviously, it looks like it's. I couldn't tell which camo pattern it was, but it says U.S. on it, and I've got a military surplus pack, but I don't have the rain cover for it yet. And I was like, yeah, I got to get one of those. But what I want to talk about, can you give us a couple of examples of people that have gone out where you've gone on a SAR trip and they've gotten lost or they've gotten themselves into trouble, and what were the steps that they did not do to properly prepare, and what was the outcome of those incidents?
Sure. While I was working for the National Park Service, I was stationed on the Gunnison. Keir County was the name of the rec area. And if anybody's familiar with Colorado, there's Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Very, very, very steep walls. You're talking a couple thousand vertical feet. People are known for base jumping illegally off of them. But it's most of the route down into the canyon is considered class from 3 to 5 scrambles. So, and what I mean by scrambles are, it's literally the name. You're scrambling. You're using your hands along with your feet to grasp. There's lots of warnings. All that to say, it's an intensive area to get into. But people would start these hikes just thinking, I want to go on a day hike. I want to go for an adventure, and it's a very unique place. It has a high amount of visitation. It's very unique for the area. So people go, I gotta get down there. I gotta see what's on the other side. This particular incident, we got a call that there was someone down in the bottom with a broken leg. And first of all, and I've heard you guys mention on the show, and you guys are, I'm sure, well aware that any SAR operation, the hardest thing is the logistics, and it takes that time. And in the meantime, somebody's down there hurting, waiting, wondering when and where someone will get to them. During that time, you're trying to gather up the tools you need. In this case, we had to have 3 crews to create basically the triangle of communication, because those cliffs were so high. We had to have someone stationed across on the other side, someone opposite them, and someone who had basically point of view roughly down to the people in the canyon to start communicating. So upon arrival, me and my partner went down. I had the med kit, which it was a full EMS med kit. So you're talking 40 pounds, full oxygen tanks, and going down into the scramble. We work our way down, and it was part of a Boy Scout troop. And that should have been the first flag, is that they, scouts are trained. They're made aware of what's necessary, who's going where, and what entails in that trip. And one of their leaders had hurt his leg. We get down there, check him out, find out his leg is not broken, and we start to do the evac. But the key part of that is just all the flags from the start. And one of those is preparation. That's what you run into in almost any search and rescue, any survival episode or issue, is that people aren't prepared. They don't look at the terrain, the topography. If they're visiting outside their known area or state, they don't look at weather patterns. All these things make something go south very rapidly. You can have a nice sunny day and then have a storm system, which people in the area are familiar. Hey, at this time of year, these move in hot and fast, and they'll freeze you out. So in this example, research wasn't done for how difficult of an area this was. And what I was going to say is, when we got down there, the gentleman said, well, when is a helicopter showing up? And I just looked down and said, it's impossible to have a helicopter come down here. We have to hike you out or carry you out. And from that point on, it becomes a coaching game of trying to convince somebody that they can do it and they can push themselves beyond what they think they can. And that's kind of how this played out. We knew he was medically sound to load bear on that leg, etc. But some of those biggest points were, and we had quite the discussion with them, especially because they were a scout group, was what planning happened here, and what were, where did the failure start? a similar one when I was working for state parks over in Idaho. There's a place called Bruno Sand Dunes. People love to come play. They come out early in the morning in those sand dunes. If anybody's been on hot sand, as soon as the sun hits that side, they can get up 120, 130 plus and actually scald your feet to the point of blisters if you're not prepared. So I had a gentleman going out, simple day. He's kind of going off trail because he's in the sand dunes. He follows the trails to begin with. And then he found I still have no idea how he even got cell service where he did. Made a call to us and said, I'm stranded. I need help. Well, same thing. There's a body of water. He thought I was going to bring a boat around. I hiked to him, brought water, etc. And the key flags on that were he didn't realize how far he'd walked. He had no additional water. He didn't know that temperatures got up as high as they could. And he just thought rescue was right there on the spot. And I think the biggest thing that stands out about survival and kind of these episodes and what I've seen during my career is just that key component of preparation and expectation. People have an expectation, especially in the society we live in, to get everything now. Like, I should have a response. If I'm thirsty, I get a drink. If I want to look up something, I can get the information immediately on my phone or the computer. I can stop at the side of the road and get food just about any time. So when folks go out camping or into these wilderness areas, I think they have that same mentality of, oh, if something happens, I can get out of it right now. And oftentimes when I'll talk to people, I say, have you notified friends of where you're going? Have you checked the weather patterns? At least tell somebody where you're at, and then we can have an idea of where we're going to search. Do you have emergency items with you? Bright fluorescent orange items that you can turn into a triangle so that we can find you and see that this is an SOS call. But that really just that failure of preparation is what causes these problems in the first, and what always stands out to me. And I think even on my trips, I try to show that, and I have to do a big amount myself of just, am I prepared? Who knows where I'm at? What's their availability? What's the nearest ranger station? What's my nearest med evac? All of these things come into play. And I think that's just the major breakdown when people go out.
Oh, exactly. You mentioned a phrase called triangle of communications. Can you tell us a little bit about what is that?
So, and I'm not sure if I'm using the term exactly as logistically as it's used, but it's areas, especially where I'm at in Idaho, where you have high terrain, and in that case, it was Colorado. Most of the radio signals, you need that line of sight, or you need some kind of repeater tower. So we would set up towers in different areas so that we could, just like a cell tower, similar, but using different frequencies, different waves, and depending on the agency, what bandwidth they use. But most times for these rural areas, you have to have either a repeater set up high on a mountain that will cascade down upon other areas. And then if somebody's stuck in a valley, that wave almost, if you picture wind going over the tops of mountains, it's not going to go all the way down in the bottom of that valley. So unless somebody is up on top of that hill, they can then ping that wave and that communication down to the person inside the canyon. And for example, at Black Canyon, that's what we had to do, is basically create a triangle where you have, and sometimes it can be a straight line, but oftentimes it's repeating all these pinpoints to where you can make that connection and just create a complete map so that wave always is bouncing to one person to the next. I kind of in like a fictional realm, I think there's a scene in Lord of the Rings where they're sending for help and they have the fire towers set up on top of all the mountains, and each one, they're long ways apart, but they managed to cover this huge distance because everyone is within sight of each other. And, we're just taking technology and basing it off of, older times of communication, not saying, Lord of the Rings is factual or historical in any sense, but it's still based off of that form of communication.
It's too bad because those eagles in the Lord of the Rings could come and bail you out in a heartbeat, but
that's right.
They don't exist. Another question I had, and that's excellent actually on the triangle of communications, because you get down into a box canyon or something like that. Wow, even if there's a repeater around, you may very well not have communications. You may not have, unless you have line of sight, you don't have access to the cell phone, or not cell phone, but the radio. You mentioned something, and then I'm taking notes here. if it's always been my understanding that if you're out in the wilderness, even a 4-foot fall can potentially be fatal. Can you comment on that, and what are your thoughts?
Oh, I think that's completely accurate. Everybody, I think in one of my videos I was talking about a first aid kit, and I have everything decked out that I'm comfortable knowing how to use, tourniquets, etc., for all these major trauma incidents. And just after filming that, I stuck my finger out a little too far while I was feather sticking and nicked the tip of my finger. And nothing bad, tiny bleed, but incredibly annoying. You got blood leaking everywhere. It's just getting on your stuff. And I just pointed out that I have little, baby Band-Aids for little minor injuries like that. And I mentioned something along the lines like it's rare that you have a high trauma event. It's usually something minor. And I think that's how people think is, well, I'm not doing anything crazy here. I'm not cliff jumping. I'm not, sprinting along this hillside or trying to take some crazy shot. But the simplest, really a foot drop, you can twist your ankle, you can snap tendons to where, depending on your health and your weight, you may have issues even moving yourself out. Or if you have shoulder issues, you won't be able to bear up, even if you could make a crutch. So the point of impact and really just, we call it the mechanism of injury when I was doing EMS, is how high is that? It doesn't really matter. It matters to the individual. I had times to responding to patients going into a diabetic coma because they hiked too hard and didn't control their sugar intake. It's along the lines of drownings. People always think, I'm not the greatest swimmer, but I'm not going to go out in the deep end. Majority of drownings happen where people stand. I had one incident I had to do in Colorado, and unfortunately the gentleman passed, but he drowned in standing where he could stand, and it was a reservoir, and so it had kind of a terrace effect when the water would go down, and he took one step too far and must have just inhaled water, and it was a very unfortunate event. But onlookers and people are going, well, how could this, it was an adult male, how could this happen? How could this tragedy? He wasn't technically swimming, he was just kind of waiting. And all of these things are kind of compounded in the wilderness. Something that in your house is benign, and it's not that the wilderness is out to kill you, but well, some aspects of it are. But you just have to have awareness. You have to have that situational awareness to, where am I placing my foot? What's under there? I recently did a trip in the lava tubes area where there's a very large lava field. And people were asking me, well, is there snakes there? And yeah, there's lots of rattlesnakes and boas around this area. Not boas, bull snakes. I hope there's not boas. That might be a different part of the world. But lots of bull snakes, which are benign and fine. But they just have a hard bite. But there's lots of rattlesnakes. And as I'm reaching in these areas and looking for a place to stay for the night, I had that in the back of my head. There could be rattlesnakes in here. Very hot day. You just have to know what's in the area. And like you mentioned, something as small as a 4-foot fall. I mean, anything over 6 foot in the EMS world is considered, high impact, where you're probably going to be calling an ambulance. So we get too relaxed and let our guard down when we go on vacation, when we go places where we're just there to have fun. And that's the time when people get hurt. They let their guard down.
I want to comment on that. The drowning in the Coast Guard, we called that the 10-10 rule. I think it was 10-10-90 or so. 90% of all drownings were 10 feet of water or less, 10 feet or less from shore. And I used to sail quite a bit, and I go sailing with guys, and they'd never wear their life jacket. All that's for for wimps and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Can you breathe water? Because if you can, it's not a problem. But if you can't, and you fall overboard, you'd be surprised. A boat doing 4 knots is out of your reach in seconds. And so it's that I think it's a 90-10-10 rule or something like that. We kept stats on that stuff. And I want to comment real quick before we move on. I watched your video camping in the lava tubes in that crevice, and that was the whole thing going through my mind was, look like a great spot for rattlesnakes. I take it you didn't find one, so that's a positive.
No, we were good. There were some creatures scurrying around there in the middle of the night, but they were small enough that I didn't want to turn and look. I thought if they get my gear, they get in. I'm sleeping.
Well, yeah, no kidding. Wow. And I've been in those lava fields before. They've always fascinated me as a kid, and they still do. They're just very interesting and fun to play around. I just don't fall where you have to use your hands to break your fall, because it's kind of like coral. It will just tear them to shreds.
Right.
Well, one of the, and I think you touched on this, but I'm just going to go back to that. People that get into trouble, and even those who maybe are experienced, do you ever run into situations where people have unrealistic expectations when they go out into the wilderness, and they've done it 10 times, they've been fine. They go out the 11th time, something grabs them. Usually the weather or something like that. Can you comment on that?
I think just kind of heading off what you last mentioned there, the weather. I think that's probably the biggest thing, because you can go to an area, say you've spent your summers in the mountains in this area and you're fairly familiar with it. All it takes is really darkness. You have a storm move in, but you get that disorientation. So it just seems like so many folks, especially like we mentioned, if they're on vacation or they're camping, they want to come up and hike whatever trail. They just expect, oh, it's a hiking trail, it's marked, I should be able to find my way along. But they don't realize that some trails have no maintenance. Some have been through a fire. So something you were there, say even 2 years prior, the whole landscape can completely change. Once a fire sweeps through, you could have a mudslide, signs get stolen, they get moved, people turn them around. So what started out as a day hike with you and your family, you're suddenly turned around where you take something that was a side trail, not an established trail that multiple people just end up taking because maybe there's a known huckleberry patch back in that area or a hot springs. And suddenly you're off the main trail, or you see something of interest and you go off that main trail. And you're all of a sudden in a situation where you have the pressure drops and you have a storm moving in, or you have some dense fog, or any one of those, or an injury that keeps you out there in the dark, and the whole landscape changes, and you have an incredibly hard time finding your way around. And I think that's where navigation and just that key point of preparedness comes in, because everybody's overconfident. I mean, I do the same thing. I've been in situations where similar to that has happened, and you have to learn your way through it and calm yourself. That's the biggest thing, is when you're caught in incidents with the unknown, your body wants to do that fight or flight, and you just want to take off in a direction because you think, oh no, am I lost? I can't be lost. This, you hear about these stories, and you just need to stop, sit down, gather where you're at. If the sun's still out, you should, I hope everyone knows the direction of the sun, and you have your general bearings. If you can't see the sun, you start to retrace the general area. When I was younger, I had a grandparent point out, before we would go out and play in the mountains or the desert, he'd say, pick a landmark, and that's your way back. Even if you have to go miles and miles, that landmark or that peak with that craggy rock or that lone pine sitting on that mountain. And like you mentioned, people's expectation to be rescued, or that nothing will go wrong, or that they've done it before, really it just comes down to pride. And I have to watch for myself, even doing my videos. Okay, have I taken the proper precautions? Have I let everybody know? Am I going past my level? Many of us do that. We want to push and we want to get that thrill of reaching the mountaintop, but sometimes you got to go, am I going to have enough juice by the time I get out there? Am I going to run out of water? Am I going to be dehydrated? So having those checks and balances in your life, even though we want to get rid of those when we're on vacation and when we're doing hobbies and when we're hiking and camping, those are the very things that will save you and get you out of a predicament, is keeping those checks and balances, keeping awareness. And if somebody finds themselves trapped like that, where suddenly the weather changes, it is really that, just having a situational awareness and calming yourself, thinking through what you do know. And our minds can play tricks on us. It's just like in the dark. Like we started off the episode talking about owls and that kind of that eerie hoot and the sounds you hear in the middle of the night. The only difference is the lights are off. The terrain's the same. Everything you know is the same. There might be a few different creatures out there, but our mind plays so many tricks, and I think that's the key for people is just stop and let yourself take in what's around you, but just keeping that guard up and not allowing yourself to get in those situations by pre-planning everything we mentioned, letting folks know, and just remove that expectation of rescue. You are responsible for yourself. You're responsible for your family, and you may find yourself where you're responsible for someone who got in that situation, and you go, I can't just walk by this guy. He's sitting here wandering in circles and has that crazy look in his eye. We need to get him out of here, and we're supposed to help our fellow man. So the more knowledge everybody can teach themselves and prepare, it just all comes down to preparedness.
Sounds like you are doing, well, you absolutely were taught, whoever taught you that as a kid, real basic, rudimentary land navigation. Find that one object that you can always get back to, even without a compass. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's and around here where I grew up, it's a lot easier than where your guys' neck of the woods, where it's that just thick. I mean, for example, if I go over there and try to shoot a video and do a hike, I really got to do my research, and I got to make sure I have a compass, make sure I have my topo maps. Around here, you're going to do some work. You're going to have to hike up to the top of the mountain to see the next valley and know where that river's going through, and that river takes you out. But yeah, landmark, to me, that's the easiest way. That's how I can get my mind around it, is topography, and then comparing that to a topography map and looking at the knowns. It's just very basic. It's very simple. I know the sun is rising over here. It's setting over here. I know this main river flows northwesterly or whatever it may be, and I know there's a highway over here or train tracks. So sometimes keeping it, I don't suggest that people only use that, but it is a simple way when folks are going into one of those benign scenarios where you think just a day trip with family, everything's okay. Well, stop, look back, and look at something that's around your car or on your way in. People tune off and they shut off their minds, especially on the way in. And it's when you're on one of those hikes, look back every 100 yards, 200 yards, even if it's just to check on your family or see who's out there, what creatures might be out there. Just that reverse pan at your surroundings, it looks completely different. And that's what happens when you turn around and you start walking that trail. You sometimes go, man, I didn't see that, or I didn't see this tree, or you kind of get that little flutter in your chest. Wait, am I still on the same trail? I don't remember this. And you're exactly where you're supposed to be. It just looks completely different. So paying attention to landmarks, those crooked trees, this big rock, that'll just do wonders. And you learn something through it. You start to learn to associate why this tree grows in that location, what type of rock this is. Could I use that tree for a shelter, etc.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to break a rule that I kind of made at the very beginning of this recording when you talked about the owls. Just very briefly, I'm going to mention that Will knows what I'm talking about. We have run into owls at 2:30 in the morning. And we're talking about owls that probably weigh, I don't know, we're estimating between 900 to 1,100 pounds. And they would hoot so loud you could almost hear them reverberating off your chest. So you'd walk towards it 100 yards, and then it 100 yards again. It kept going and going. It was drawing us into what we thought was an ambush. But anyway, I apologize. It's too easy to get off topic, especially when talking about this.
That's interesting for sure.
Yeah. So, all right, getting back on topic here. Well, your topic. You had mentioned SAR patterns. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I was in the Coast Guard, and we did SAR patterns that would probably not be real effective, especially with a lot of rhododendrons and vine maples and old growth and stuff like that. I'm being very sarcastic. And we did them in the ocean. But, you did have landscape features, but they changed every second. So tell us a little bit about the SAR patterns when you're doing a search and rescue situation.
So usually we would just grid off and have a grid coordinate set, either map or depending on what system we were using. But just the basic of it, and I think this is what's easiest for most people to understand, is that you're just doing a strafing. You're, depending if, say you start from one person all the way up to, say you get some folks together in this, maybe you don't have an official search and rescue team in the area, but you're trying to find a family member, you can create a grid for your area, especially if you have that map on you, or in this day and age, if your phone has service and you're able to pull up a map, you can see the general features and the layout of the area, and you can start to grid off a section. You look over and you see that mountain and you see it has a saddle. Okay, I know I'm east of that saddle, and there's a lake further to my east, and there's this little canyon to my south, etc. And you create kind of a boxed in area. And all I mean by that grid pattern is you go, we're going to search this area. We're going to stretch out every 100 to 200 yards, depending on the terrain and line of sight, or if you have radios. And we're going to try to walk a straight pattern through this area. And that way you can grid it off. And then especially if you have, the ability to, you have whistles and you can yell and you can try to use other forms of communication to find what it is you're trying to find or the person that's lost. If you're doing it alone, you can create a map of your own. If you carry, folks should carry a little notepad with them. For one, it's just handy to have if you're out camping. You can jot down your thoughts, notes, the different terrain you see and animals and plants, and just kind of create a knowledge base in yourself. But you can also start to map and draw out an area. And if you're going to be out, say you're out hunting, you're doing a week-long hunt and you're working your way up over this ridge, you can start to map that area and compare it to, hopefully you have a topo map on you. And if you're lost, or if you're solo and lost in an area, you can start to do the same thing. Create kind of, once you get a shelter and somewhere that's getting you out of the elements and you can find water. And this is for a scenario where somebody's really, really stuck in the backcountry and no one knows where they are. Rescue isn't coming. You can start to branch off from there and make yourself a grid of what you know is in the area. And you can use that to self-evac. Because the biggest thing people do is they march back on themselves and they repeat and do circles. For some reason, us humans like to walk in circles when we're lost. I don't know if everybody just has a shorter right leg or left leg, and maybe some people, maybe the northern hemisphere, they go clockwise, and the southern they go counterclockwise when they're lost. But either way, it is a very recorded habit that people do, and they end up in the same area. Well, if you're able to do that grid pattern, you can start to mark down features and terrain as you go, and you can start to branch out until you recognize something, or you recognize the trail you were on, or you see that feature of, oh, that mountain was over by the parking lot. You can just expand your area. And so it works just for solo and for group tactics in a search and rescue scenario. That way you're not covering the same area. You can go, okay, we gridded off this area. Now let's go over west of that canyon and to the southeast a little bit, and we'll grid off that area. And that's just a very effective way to use your resources wisely and to not cover the same area twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of dovetails into the next question I have, and that is, we had a gentleman on here a few years back, former military guy, and he said that basically, and it really makes sense, there comes a point when you're in the woods that you need to make a decision. I'm at the threshold where I need to either spend the night or go back. And if I don't do that, you're going to become a statistic. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think mental prowess, mental acuity is huge. And I kind of have two answers to that. Well, two parts. Is that, yes, you very much have to make that decision at some point. And that's based off of what we talked about in the beginning, is that preparation. Does somebody know where you're at? That is the biggest thing. If somebody knows where you're at and they have a timetable when you return, every time I leave, I tell my wife and usually a friend, this is the area I'm going, just even to do a single night filming episode. This is the area I'm going to. This is the time I'll be back. And I give a timeline. If I am not back by this point, send help to this area. I'll give alternates of, if I'm not in this area, check here. So if people have made that point of that key point of preparation, notified people, that's kind of the decision point, I believe, because if someone knows you're in that area, and then you can probably hold tight, because we have, and especially in the Northwest, we have excellent search and rescue teams. We've got man trackers and dog training, dog handlers, that more than likely, yeah, you might have a few uncomfortable nights and it might be scary, but you can make it out, because eventually, using that grid pattern, using tracking, they will find you. The biggest thing is to keep yourself safe. Like you mentioned, taking a 4-foot plunge. If somebody just goes crazy and they think, I'm running, I'm getting out of here, I'm just going to start trekking off this way. Well, for one, your stress level is up, you might injure yourself, and now you're in a different location. All of a sudden, you've gone 4 miles outside of the area where you were supposed to be. Maybe they thought you were only going to do a couple miles, and you have adrenaline pumping, and you made a new hiking record for yourself, and now you've just increased that time and the difficulty of somebody to find you. I think the other part, and I'm trying, as I gather my thoughts, I have a lot of ideas popping up for that. And what was the second part of your question? Just to bounce back, how you phrase that?
Well, yeah, it was basically, there comes a threshold when you're either hunting, hiking, or whatever. You need to make a decision. Do I spend the night or do I go back?
Right. The second part of that, and thanks for jogging my memory there, is humans have a high ability to do far beyond what we think we can. So say you're in that situation, opposite the situation, where you went out, you didn't tell anybody, you got in a hurry, and you thought, I'm going to be okay, I'm just going to do a day hike. Now you're stranded for whatever reason, the weather changed, you're somewhere where no one knows where you're at, there's low, maybe you're not even on a trail, you're just bushwhacking your way through, and the odds of somebody hiking in that same area is going to be very slim, especially if you're doing any kind of winter trekking. You have a storm come through, your tracks are gone, terrain is completely different, and no one is coming. So that if no one knows you're in that spot, then I think it is very vital for people to look at their surroundings, look at their abilities, and make that decision to leave. If you don't have resources around you to kind of hold tight, that's another thing. You don't have water. We can go without food. We can go with pain. We can cover great miles. A lot of things that kind of influence me as well, books that influence me growing up and kind of bounce off the same idea, is a lot of the Northwest Passage exploration stories of like endurance, the story of Shackleton, or there's a book called Resolute, and it goes into the John Franklin expedition and the discovery of the ghost ship. Stephen Ambrose's Undaunted Courage. Those all talk about historical figures who have done these amazing tasks around the world, these amazing feats of survivability, where people would go, no, that's not a true story. That couldn't really happen. And these men have performed these feats purely off of mental power. Given they obviously had skills and abilities, but a lot of these stories talk about people pushing past what they think they can do and having that mindset that I'm not going to sit down and be a victim. I'm going to push forward and I'm going to do something. And once you make that mindset, say someone is in that scenario where, okay, no one knows I'm here and I'm walking out, then you make that commitment. You don't waffle on it, because we can convince ourselves to do some amazing things. And I'm sure most folks have been around somebody, or I know I've done it myself, where you start to talk yourself out of something. And once you allow that talk to begin, you're probably going to stop. It's just like if you have a chore or something you want to accomplish and you go, I'm kind of tired, I don't want to do that. You're probably not going to do it. You're making excuses. So in something that's a high risk thing, life and death like this, you make that commitment and you go hard, knowing that it's up to you. And you be smart about it, but you can push past pain. We can go without water for a few days, go without food for a lot. If you're freezing and cold, movement, you can make your body move and you can keep that blood pumping. So it is a very razor's edge of making that call, but I think it all comes down to whether or not anybody knows you're in the area and whether you yourself think there's any chance of somebody finding you. And if there's not, I say you pull the plug, make that call, and start taking in your surroundings and tell yourself, I can do this. I can get myself out of here. Like I can make it, with a little bit of pain and discomfort for a few days. And because plenty of people have beforehand, and they've done some amazing things through that.
It sounds like situational awareness plays a huge role in this. Okay, so unless you have absolute zero visibility, fog, cloud cover, whatever, if you can find that peak, or if you can even leapfrog from, okay, I'm going to go 200 yards because I see that, unique, that funny looking tree. I'll make it to that tree, and then I'll look for another unique land feature or a unique tree or bush or something like that. Is that a good idea to do something like that to kind of extricate yourself out of that situation?
I think it is, because it's almost, what you're describing there is almost it's like taking a bearing with a compass. You pick a point, you pick that tree, and you go, okay, I'm walking to that tree. I want to keep on a straight line. So if you don't have a compass and you're lost, you need that point of reference rather than just walking blindly in an area. You have to have that situational awareness of, okay, this hill in this area is starting to drop down. Well, you got to look up and see, is this going into a canyon that I can't get out of, or I'm going to be doing a scramble? Or you start scrambling yourself and you're kind of slipping and sliding and crawling down some rock. Well, you might be boxed in by the time you didn't realize to take the time to look up and see that, oh, this wasn't a good route. I mean, we can naturally, our brains can adapt to and take in our surroundings. And God gave us a brain to figure those things out, even the basic of just, oh, if I go this way, this is bad, or this is a raging river that I can't cross, or those 2 points of the mountain kind of come close together there, and there might be a valley on the other side that I can drop into. But as you mentioned, just picking a feature and using that point of reference to go to, so that you're not, I'm just going to go generally towards the sun and hopefully I'll run into somebody that way. You have to keep stock of where you've been and where you're going. And like I mentioned, having that notepad comes in real handy for that time, where you can keep track of those things. And that way you create some comfort that way too, because you go, okay, now I know something. Now I know I came from there and I came from here, and it took me this long to get here. So it's obviously it's dependent on the situation and the terrain, and if you're, say, near the ocean or in thick woods. But generally speaking, having that awareness of your surroundings is only going to benefit you, and not having it is going to cause damage.
Well, yeah, and I think that's an excellent idea with the notepad. I picked up a cheap one at my local hardware store that is the waterproof, and you can use any kind of a pencil on it, but you just, the paper, once you write on it, that's it. So if you make a mistake, you can't erase it. You just put a line through it. So yeah, the notepad is fantastic. Sometimes I've used beads, ranger beads or pace beads to, measure the distance that I've traveled. And I would say it's an excellent idea. I do this in my area. We have some huge, I just call them horse pastures. They're just giant, I don't know, they raise alfalfa and different hay and stuff like that, but they're large. And they cross multiple features and that sort of thing. It's a good area to just practice that sort of thing, because when you first start doing something new and unique, something as simple as taking notes, that's 200 yards to that tree, pace beads and that sort of thing, you got to practice, because the first time you do it, it probably won't work. You got to figure out why, right?
It's exactly right. Practice. That is the key.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking about what you guys are talking about and stuff, and there's been times when I go into a wooded area that I'm not familiar with, and a lot of times I'll take like that orange tape and wrap it around a tree limb or something as I'm going through there, so that way I'll know what direction I'm going and how to get out of there if I need to.
That's an excellent idea. And that stuff is so inexpensive and so lightweight. You could have it in your pocket and it wouldn't bother you a bit. But man, it stands out bright orange and yellow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a real good one, Chuck. And I've also heard where people will put a blaze on a tree. You put one kind of blaze pointing the direction that you're traveling in, but on that same tree, you put a reverse blaze so that when you look back, and you put, every 100, 200 yards, to put a blaze on a tree. So I'm going to ask, is this something you're familiar with, and what are your thoughts about doing that without damaging the tree?
Right. I think it's fair game because you're trying to survive. I mean, yeah, most trees are so impervious. I mean, they have systems built in, protect themselves. We have a lot of ponderosa around here, and you can tell when somebody's been hitting on a tree because you get the big sap buildup, and that's why it's built is to protect it. So, but regardless, I mean, a tree should never come over somebody's life. So if you need to get out of there, you do. If you need to torch a perfectly healthy tree and send up a signal, you do that. But the nice thing about I've never had to do the blaze pattern, but you can see, I've seen examples of when people do it, and it's just that white theme that pops up once you get through the cambium layer of the tree and you get down to the meat. It's just like a beacon. And like you mentioned, putting that reverse, like we kind of talked about earlier, always looking back and seeing what things look like. Otherwise, it's going to be a mystery. It's going to look totally different. And a key part of that is putting it at head level, along with what Chuck mentioned with the ribbon. Our natural thing, especially if you're in a hurry or you're nervous, I'm just going to tie this to whatever's at hand level, or put a blaze on this mark right at waist level because we're used to chopping at that level. But you need to put those things up where your eye is going to see it at head level, and where searchers are going to be looking. Because when they're doing a pan, or if you're doing a pan through a forest, we aren't usually crouched down. We're not usually stooping. We're at head level, and we're looking at what is in line with our eyes. And so if you can keep kind of that spectrum, keep it within where your eyes would see, it's just something to take into account. But I say it's fair game, and it's fantastic. It's another reason to carry a blade or a hatchet with you. That's extremely vital to have some kind of cutting tool with you. I don't care if you're going for a day hike or anything. I had a buddy who never carried pocket knives, and I got him one as a gift. And he goes, this thing, I use this all the time. I never realized how handy it was. I think a lot of people think like, I don't want to, be carrying around a knife, but the smallest knife, a Swiss Army knife, anything, a Leatherman can help you so much in one of those instances, because it's pretty hard to put a blaze. I mean, you can go find a sharp rock and a shale, and that's another thing of paying attention to your resources. You can also do that with a cairn. You can make a rock pile. You can stack branches. Anything that's going to give you some kind of notification that you've been there. That's what you do. That's where that situational awareness comes in, is what tools can I use? If I don't have physical tools on me, what tools in the environment can I use to also let somebody know, hey, there's somebody been here, and I'm trying to hike due east. And if they come and say you're going the wrong way, but the rescuers or the search and rescue team are coming up on your tail, they go, oh, okay, we're getting close to them. So you gotta point out with some kind of, even if you make an arrow with rocks on the ground, if somebody's doing man tracking or has a dog, they're going to find that. I mean, odds are better that they're going to find it at least.
That's an excellent point. Doing an arrow, if nothing else, you can make the cairns or the arrows. So we're going to wrap it up pretty quick. But what I want to do is, the last question I have for you is, do you have a list of basic, hey, I'm going out for a day hike. I'm going out to an area. Everything's going to be fine. And in my heart of hearts, I don't believe a single person who gets lost, when they left the house that day, said, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get lost. I really don't believe they do that. Would you have a basic list of items, that they would, obviously you should have a backpack, you should have water, but supplement to that, what would you recommend people carry just to be prepared and, not run into that situation?
I think to me, it comes down to some kind of medical kit, something to make fire, and some kind of cutting tool. If you already have some form of water, I guess I would throw a fourth on there, and that would be some kind of water filter, because for me, that's the biggest thing that I think our bodies are going to fail at, is if we get dehydrated. So say you bring you've got an algae bottle, you've got 32 ounces of water, you go out. Well, that water's going to go really quick if the weather changes, it heats up, and all of a sudden you've run through your water source, and there's, you're going to have to find some creek nearby. And if there's not one nearby, you're going to have to hike over that hill till you find one, and who knows how that water is. So there's so many options for just little mini filters now that people can bring along, from Sawyer to other ones to, I think Grail has a water bottle now. Actually, I know they do. You can just scoop up. And I mean, the technology has come so far that you should have that either as your primary water holder or have one with you, because if you get dehydrated and you start overheating, and then all of a sudden you have a medical just because you didn't have water. So I would say some form of water purification, even if it's iodine tablets. They're small, easy to carry. Like I mentioned, those filters are easy to carry. As far as fire and making fire, there's so many options out there too. Like, you need to have a source to keep yourself warm. Say you have a meal with you and you can get by with that. You need a way to cook that meal. But also for signaling and there's comfort in fire. I think that's the biggest thing is if you're lost, you're alone at night, if you can make a fire, what that's going to do psychologically for you, it's just going to boost your morale, and not to mention just keeping you warm. It may be really warm out at night and you don't need a fire, but to have that, there's something about fire that just allows you to calm down and kind of clear your head. So, and like my fire kit, I carry multiple lighters. I carry ferro rod. If people don't know what that is, it's just a ferrocium rod. It just shoots off incredibly hot sparks. If you use another piece of metal to scrape it, it's what I primarily use in all my videos. Very easy to learn with, very easy to use. They last. I'd be impressed if you can burn one through. You could go to Walmart or any kind of little aid shop and get those little magnesium sticks that have a striker on them and use those. But having multiple backups, I can't tell you how many times I've gone out and I thought, okay, this time I'm just going to be lazy and use a lighter. Well, cold weather, those lighters don't work. That fuel freezes up and you have a striker, but you have no fuel coming out. And so it doesn't work. Carrying some just matches, in a waterproof case, but having and making, and it's fun to do this too, and you can do it with family, you can do it with friends, make a little fire kit. So I'd say next to water is the fire kit, and having backups within that, and having tinders and collecting those tinders when you're out, something that that burns. And there's a lot of man-made ones that are made to get wet and they still burn. I'd say next to that, and these aren't in order of priority, but medical is probably the most important. There's plenty of companies that make pre-made little kits that are easy to put on your backpack or shove in a pouch. You can even, if you have some bigger cargo pockets, you can fit things in there, because back to kind of the water reference, if you have a medical, if you have a miss strike with an axe even, and you send it into your shin, or you're cutting improperly and you come close to, you're getting to arteries or big cuts, or like we mentioned, you have a fall and you don't have a way to bandage yourself up and you don't have a tourniquet. So learn first aid. There's plenty of shops and in-house classes, and there's plenty of YouTube videos that'll walk you through step by step, a lot from these same medical companies. So educate yourself and get a medical kit. Next, I would have some cutting tool, because there's just so much that you can do with cutting tools. Have with you from shelter building, and along those lines, I would throw in some cordage. So I guess those would kind of be my main ones: is some kind of water filtration device, medical, a small kit, forms of making a fire, and some kind of cutting tool, whether, like I said, it's a Leatherman or a simple Swiss Army or a fixed blade knife on your hip or axe, and then having some cordage. And you can do volumes with that. You can have a shelter up, you could have a fire, and you can have a water source. If you're near a water source, you can purify that water and have at least that comfort. And like I mentioned earlier, if you come across somebody, say you're okay out on the field, and you come across somebody who doesn't have those things, all of a sudden you get to be the hero and you get to help somebody out and educate them. So I would say that's the keys to having your pack all the time, in your car, wherever you go.
Those are excellent suggestions. Well, listen, before we wrap this up, I want to run around to our panel virtually and ask everybody if they have a question, kind of a last question for you. So I guess I'll start off with David, any questions?
No questions. Great information. The only thing I would throw in as far as being sure to have with you is extra clothes.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's that's a key component. Thank you.
All right. And then I'll run over to Chuck. Chuck, any questions? You had an excellent one suggestion earlier. Any final questions?
Like Dave, very good information. And, you know, the way we do things out here sometimes, it's good to have that kind of information so we can protect ourselves and protect anybody else we run into. So thank you for coming on the show.
You bet.
Absolutely. Forrest, any questions? I wanted to hear from you.
No, I really don't have any questions. I found it very interesting, though.
I did too. I was hoping you're going to suggest maybe have a horse with you to travel in the backcountry. Forrest is a rancher. She has I don't know how many horses you have now, but you got a gob of them, right?
Yeah, right. I have a whole herd.
Yes. Will, any closing questions?
No questions. Just made me think about, you know, one of the most important thing being out there if something happens is your mental state, like you mentioned. I was in a situation one time years ago where a friend and I were up picking chanterelle mushrooms, and I was paying more attention to the ground than I was where we were, and we got turned around up in the mountains, and you know, I was looking around thinking, oh, okay, we can just follow. You know, we started following the creases in the mountains down to where there was a creek, and then the creek went to the road. But the friend of mine was with me. He sat down and started crying and was going to give up and die. And I said, I don't know about you, but I got lunch in the car and I'm hungry. So, you know.
Yeah, you got to have that mindset of I'm going to survive no matter what. All right. Well, listen, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Edgar, stay on the line, and we might have a couple questions for you after the show.
Sure. No, I appreciate you guys having me. Love what you're doing, and yeah, thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.